Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Connected by Community, a podcast brought to you by Ballentine Capital Advisors. I'm Bryan Ballentine, and I am joined by Cameron Cannon.
Hey, good to be here. Good to be on the other side of the table.
Yeah. So this is kind of our financial New Year's resolution, kind of talk about what we need to change this year. So we want to kind of kick off some of those financial topics. I know a lot of people are talking about all the other topics that are always out there and normal. And so what we thought we'd do with our audience, Cameron, is just kind of you and I talk about the things that we see that people probably overlook and mistakes, and hit on maybe 4 of those areas today for our listeners to think about as they're making their resolutions, still working on them, and make this a plan and encourage it. So with that, I'm going to fire away at you first, if that works.
Let's do it.
All right, man, here we go. So in working with some of your peers, some of the younger generation, and some of the entrepreneur folks that I know a lot of your peers are starting businesses, being successful. Why do you think planning is important, and what are some of the things that these folks need to consider? You know, they're being successful, or they're doing the right things, but maybe what are they missing in overall financial planning as they're accumulating wealth?
I mean, I would say one of the first things is you got to be prepared for anything. You know, we're kind of in a crazy time, especially my generation, this younger, getting out of school, paying off debt, potentially getting married like I just did, buying houses. You really got to be prepared for all that. And I think that starts with a really good emergency fund. I see a lot of my peers, a lot of people even, mid 30s and 40s that I work with. Maybe they don't have an adequate emergency fund. Maybe they, have a little bit too much debt. And they're kind of not accounting for that. So if, something crazy comes up, unfortunately, like, they lost a job, they had a huge bill coming up, they either have to tap into their investments, which is, obviously not a fantastic idea, or they'd have to go into debt for it. So I think that's one of the main issues that I see, that a lot of young people kind of get into, is not being prepared for if something bad happens. And then, kind of going more to the positive side, I think a lot of people really lose out on what I call free money, right? There's a lot of people that are working for a really good employer, and their employer has blessed them with an employer match, right? And, if they're not putting any money into the 401k or whatever that is, they're kind of losing out on a free 100% return theoretically. So what that looks like, is if you put in 3% and your employer matches 3%, I mean, you're automatically getting a 3%, 3% on top of your money for free.
So why would someone not do that?
I think a lot of it comes down to kind of what I went back to before. Maybe they have debt or maybe they want a new car that they want to have a payment go towards, and they don't want to see, that $100 or $200 a month come off their paycheck. And I know that sucks. We're getting out of school. We're trying to, accumulate what we want. We've been working, in school to, buy a house, buy a car, get the new clothes, whatever it might be. But it's kind of one of those things. I'm like, you're missing out on free money. Where else are you going to get that?
I'm going to use a politically incorrect term. It's a dumb decision.
It is. It is a dumb decision.
Do it, right? It's like one of the smartest things you can mathematically do.
It is. So, I preach that a lot too. I mean, what I preach is what I do myself. I have an emergency fund. I get the employer match, obviously, at work. I think a couple other things that people really miss out on is they're underinsured. And I'm not here to pitch life insurance or disability insurance to anybody, but especially somebody like myself that just got married. If I were to pass away tomorrow, I want to make sure my wife is going to, be taken care of, or at least have enough money to make it through until she can kind of get through everything. If you have kids, I think it's even more imperative. So I think that's one thing a lot of people miss out on. I personally like the term insurance route, potentially, for younger people, not pitching insurance or anything. And then I would think another thing that a lot of people miss out on is the disability insurance portion. Even if you have it through work, a lot of people are grossly underinsured on that. You're actually more likely to get disabled than you are to ever use life insurance. So I think that's another big issue that people miss out on is, say you get, unfortunately in a car accident and you're disabled, or you get disabled at work, you're still going to have to pay your bills. You're still going to have to save for retirement. And how are you going to do that? It's probably not going to be living off the government. You're not going to be making enough off that. And if you have insurance through work, it's probably not enough to pay your bills. So I really like to get somebody's, what their employer is offering, and kind of really read through it and see what I can pick out to say, hey, this could potentially be a problem area for you.
Yeah, I would say disability insurance in people who are anywhere from 25 to 50, I'll say that's a broad range, is probably the most overlooked insurance for most of those folks. I'm using a broad stroke, but I've been doing this almost 25 years. And I can tell you, because I have a mom that has been disabled and a wife that has health problems. Disability doesn't always happen in an accident, and it doesn't always happen in a work-related place. It doesn't happen. It may not be the person you think. You may be walking by someone who looks perfectly healthy, and they have something that affects their ability to hold a job. So you're right. They're about 5 or 6 times more likely, when I last read the studies, to become disabled than collecting a life insurance policy. And I always equate it to this: you are the goose laying the golden egg when you go to work. If you had a goose in your garage laying golden eggs, would you insure that goose if you could? The answer is, if you're a rational person, yes. The next rational thing is, how much would you insure it for? And the answer ought to be as much as some insurance company would allow me, right?
Yep.
So yeah, it's unfortunate, because it's more likely to happen and people overlook it. And unfortunately, we get caught up and think we're healthy. And it's a whole nother subject. Everyone thinks they're super healthy, right?
And I think you hit the nail on the head too, is, if you can't afford to retire today, if your income were to go away, you're going to have some way to replace that, right? And if you can't physically or mentally, hold a job down to pay for that there's a big issue there. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I have it through work, and they don't understand that it doesn't even cover remotely close to all of your income. And, that's when we go back again and say, okay, well, could you live off 50% of what you're making now and still save for retirement, still have your kids go to school and still support your family? Well, probably not. So we need to look at other alternatives and maybe some outside coverage. So, that's one thing I see. And another one that I think a lot of people let go off the table while they're in their early earning years, and potentially increasing their earnings as they go, is a Roth IRA. It's extremely under or overlooked, in my opinion. We see a lot of people that retire and all they have is qualified dollars, right? And a lot of people don't understand that that's going to affect how much, when you retire, you pay in Medicare. It's going to affect how much your Social Security is taxed, and affect your capital gains taxation. So I think a lot of that people don't understand. Oh, well, I got, $1 million in a 401k or something. Okay, well, when you account for taxes, you don't have $1 million. So I think that's something that a lot of people, overlook. And then when they get in their 30s and 40s and 50s, and they can, afford to, put money into it, they make too much and they can't do it anymore. So I think that's something that a lot of people overlook. And, even if you're putting $100, $200 a month in there, it's still, getting it started.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those folks, you look at what's in the driveway or the garage that has 4 wheels, a lot of times that takes precedence over those funding things, right?
Yep.
So I know historically, when I've heard I can't afford it, they can't afford that, but they can afford the payment to BMW or wherever their
$60,000 truck. Yeah.
Right. So, listen, cars are nice. That's great. Houses are nice. That's great. But you're going to need those things when you're 80, and how are you going to pay for them? Right.
Yep.
And so some amount of commitment, at least at the base level, makes a lot of sense. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Kind of like you said, just goes down to commitment and what's important to you. And, we got to get that thinking away from get rich quick schemes and short term, and really start thinking long term, because, God willing, you're going to be here and you're going to retire one day, and whether you have money or not, it's kind of up to you. So yeah, that's on you. Well, speaking of retirement in general, you're kind of the expert retirement planner. You've been doing it, like you just said, for close to 25 years. What are some of the things that you see, folks that are looking to retire these days run into? What are some of the problems? What are some of the solutions? And just kind of what are you seeing as a whole?
Yeah. So I would say that one of the number one questions I've gotten in my career is, can I afford to retire? And I always have the same answer is, well, it depends on the lifestyle you want, right? So if you want to live in a cardboard box, a lot of people can afford to retire now. If you want to live the lifestyle you're living now, that's a different one. Or if you want to live a higher lifestyle. And so I think sometimes, and the other thing people ask, how much money do I need to retire? And there's no uniform answer. For some people, it might be $1 million. Some people, it might be 10 million. Some people, it might be more, right? It's a function of really what you spend. So, what I see now as current is the same thing probably I saw 25 years ago, and it's human behavior. We've got to get a grip on what we need. And I'm not talking about tracking where every pack of bubble gum goes, or every little small thing you do, but you have to have a sense, do you really need $5,000 a month, $10,000, $15,000 or $20,000 a month? And an approximation. And people have a difficult time with that, because most people have been working their career, getting the kids through school, doing their thing. They wake up and, they're 55, 60, and they're starting to think about this retirement thing. And they're thinking about, gee, what do I need and what do I want to do? And they don't know that. So some really self-reflection, some study on those budgets, What will it take? And obviously we have tools that can help with that. People don't have to walk alone, but I would say that's the first thing when people want to get their mindset around retirement is they've got to get a grasp on what does retirement look like financially, and very specifically budgetarily. Is it a 5,000, a 10,000, a 15, a 20,000? There's no right or wrong. There's no judgment in that. It just is.
And be realistic, right?
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, what you always say too, and I think it's a great scenario. Say you're making $10,000 a month, right? If you come to us, you're like, oh, I live for $3,000 a month off retirement. Okay, well then you should have a massive savings account, right? And if you don't, then it's going somewhere, right? So I think that's one thing that I mean I personally see, and I know you see it as well, is people come in, they're spending all of their paycheck, but then when they retire, they're miraculously going to cut it in half. And we say it all the time. You can't cut there's not enough direct TV bills and newspaper subscriptions to be able to retire. If you can't retire and you got to cut that, then that's there's bigger issues at hand. You need to work longer and have a bigger nest egg.
Yeah, we see it all the time, and we do say those things. You can't cut your cable bill to make it to retirement. And, unless your checking account's growing, if you're making 100 or 200 or 300, doesn't really matter the number. If your checking account's staying the same, what's coming in is going out, you're spending pretty much every dime. And sometimes people are shocked at that. I know you see it as well. We see people come in all the time and, very stereotypically between the two of them, they're making $150,000, $200,000 a year after taxes and everything. Whatever that is left is coming in the checking account, and they'll look us square in the eye and say, yeah, I only need about $3,000 a month for my bills is usually how they'll put it. And after about a 30-second conversation, we can realize their bills they're just thinking about some of the day-to-day things that are coming up, but forgetting a whole bunch of other things. Like I think one of the biggest things people easily forget is the cost of inflation, and that's been hot in the news, healthcare, and taxes. So I'll give you those three real quick, and we could do a whole episode on just those, right? So for years, I've been preaching inflation, and only until the last year or so, people started paying attention. But inflation's real, right? Your gas costs more, your bread costs more, your milk, your stamps, your whatever. You go to the grocery store, you buy clothes, you do whatever you're going to do. The other thing, people are going to buy cars when they're retired, right? If you retire at 60, you probably didn't buy your last car. They're going to cost you money. How are we going to pay for that? You're going to go on vacation. How are we going to pay for that? Before, maybe you worked some overtime, took a side job, you did other things. When you're on truly a fixed income, we have, to the best of our ability, account and budget for those things. And inflation is a killer there. And you mentioned this earlier with Roth, and I'll talk about taxes. The number one expense most people have in their life, taxes. It's not a house. It's not any of those other things. It's taxes. Just simple math. Let's say somebody pays 25% effective tax to their life. That means 25% of every dime ever earned for their entire career went to the federal, state, local governments. Let that sink in for a while. Right?
Yeah, and I know we talk about that too. I mean, a lot of people kind of overlook that, but if you were writing a check for 25% of your income to the government every year, a lot of people probably wouldn't save it enough to do that, and a lot of people would probably be a little more upset about it.
Oh, there would be a revolt on Washington tomorrow.
Yeah.
If everybody had to sit down and stroke a check. Again, we'll have a whole nother episode on that one.
And what about Social Security and pensions? I know a lot of people that are like, oh, I'll just live off my Social Security when I retire. I guess, can you speak on that a little bit? And then also, pensions were big, especially for my parents and your parents' generation, but it's obviously kind of starting to wither away. So I guess, can you speak on that and how that plays into effect as well?
Yeah, I will. So don't let me forget that, but I want to step one step back. I want to talk really quick about healthcare as the other trifecta from when we started, because healthcare relays into Medicare, which somewhat affects Social Security. It all is just tied in together. And so however you've been getting your health care when you're working is probably going to change. If you retire early, you may have to be on one of the exchanges called the ACA. You may have to be on a spouse's plan, or when you're 65, you're going to have to go into Medicare. A lot of people think Medicare's free, and it's not free. You've been paying for part of it, Part A, your whole life, but you're probably going to have a supplement or some other type plan. It's going to cost you some money, and it's probably some serious bucks. For a lot of our clients, because they tend to make good incomes, they pay something called IRMA tax, which means they pay a higher Medicare than most people do. So that's affected by all those things that you talked about earlier. So I just want to mention that as we go into Social Security conversation. So let's move into that. Social Security is a big deal. When do you take it? How do you take it? Where do you take it? Right? Social Security is a household decision. A lot of times people might want to come in and just know about their Social Security, but their spouse's decision can and usually does affect them. Waiting to full retirement age for most people is a wise consideration. Certainly not always recommended. If someone can afford it and it works out, even to 70 can be advantageous because there's an increase. There's no one size fits all. We have to take health into consideration, other assets into consideration, and the spouse's relationship into consideration. So there's a lot to think about, along with the taxes, the inflation, and the medical, all that stuff that goes along. So it's important. And so we're unpackaging a lot here with a limited time. So I want to throw this all out as people begin to think about retirement this year. But the other thing they have to think about, if they're so fortunate to still have a pension. So we still work with a number of folks that have pensions from some larger companies out there. Could even be the state employer, like the state of South Carolina for teachers, or could be a BMW, Duke, AT&T. These type of large employers sometimes still offer a pension, and they have decisions to make around that. Because they're once and generally irrevocable decisions, it's critical that they make the right decision, and you need to make that decision in the context of a plan. Like Social Security, a lot of times we see people coming in and they'll say, well, I'm making this decision in Social Security, and they've not done a plan. Or they're making this decision with their pension and they're not done a plan. The problem is that's making a decision in a vacuum. If we did that, I might show up with a Corvette tonight because it's the fastest car I could buy on the lot, right? But it might not fit my family, right? If I got to have 4 seats and I don't have babies anymore, but if I needed a place to put a baby, probably wouldn't be the best vehicle, right? So I equate going out buying a Corvette for speed, the equivalent of making a decision of Social Security or a pension without looking at the whole plan. And maybe an SUV or some other kind of car would have been a better family car that still had plenty of speed, but could maybe solve the problem better that I had for my family. So that's a lot. I mean, in a few quick minutes here that we have, things that people need to think about are all those. And if they aren't able to or don't have the skills and training, they should seek, whether it's us or someone else, a qualified, certified financial planner who's been trained in these areas, because that's ultimately what folks like us do all day. I mean, I'm not real good at tap dancing, so don't ask me to do that. So hopefully you're working with a professional that can help you navigate these things to the best of your ability.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, you only hopefully get to retire once, right?
Right.
And it's
if you do it right.
Yeah. If you do it right, and it's a huge decision. So, I mean, that's what we want to do for our clients. And, kind of like you said, if you're making a decision in a vacuum, you're probably not making a wise decision. So you got to look at all of those and how they all interconnect and play together. So it's definitely a huge decision to make.
You do. And, another area with that, we're kind of talking about retirement planning. Let's talk about small businesses, right? Start of the year, a lot of small businesses are thinking about retirement plans, benefit plans. The labor market's still pretty tight, being competitive. When you're out there, I know you talk to a lot of small business owners in the 401k world and qualified plan world and other benefits. What are some of the things that you're seeing that are working, not working, or considerations maybe some of those small business owners that are listening here today may ought to think about?
Well, I mean, you mentioned the labor market is extremely tight. And I think that, people that are looking for jobs, job seekers are really looking, what are the benefit plans? I mean, I've heard that from a lot of people, a lot of younger people that I work with as well. Does it have a 401k? I mean, you mentioned health insurance, profit sharing. Does it have that kind of stuff? And if it does, what are the options that they have? So, we've seen a lot of small business owners have a 401k plan, and I'm fortunate, and so are you, that we have Anthony in our office who kind of came from that world and is the expert subject matter. So, I defer to him on a lot of it, but a lot of things that we've seen is inside of the 401k plans, if you offer it, it's obviously advantageous to the employer, but it's also, advantageous to the employee. It helps them, hopefully secure a job there, and it also helps them for their retirement. But one thing that is maybe a word of caution for small business owners is, have you read your plan documents, and do you understand your liability for that? And a lot of people and a lot of plans that I've looked at, the owner, maybe they set it up with a payroll provider, and they just say, oh, they kind of handle it. They sign the form 5500 and boom, they're off to the races. But they might not understand that they have a fiduciary liability to that plan. So I think that's a big issue that I've seen. And, plan documents are confusing. It's obviously written by attorneys, and they use some interesting language in there, but you really need to have somebody look over your plan, somebody that's an expert in that, to see, am I liable for this plan? What what are some things that I could do to maybe
the answer is yes.
Yeah, you are. So I didn't want to give it away, but can I reduce that liability, which is also yes. And who can I work with to do that? You see a lot of payroll providers and large insurance conglomerates, offering these plans for quote unquote cheap or even free. And, the owner of the plan doesn't understand what they're actually signing. So I think that's a big, big issue that we're seeing that I'm trying to preach because, you don't want to Google in your company name and see a lawsuit come up because employee didn't understand what they were investing in or, they had an issue with the plan. So I think that's a big issue that we're seeing these days.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most misunderstood things out there in the retirement planning world is employers not understanding their liability and responsibility and neglecting that a lot of times just because it's not what they do day to day. And oftentimes choosing plans that appear free or cheap, but have hidden costs. I always say if something's free or cheap, watch your pocket, you're probably being picked. And
it's probably in that very, very small black lines on the bottom that you're not reading, right? The actual fees, the actual, payments that you're doing. And a lot of people, plan sponsors don't understand as well. A lot of those fees could potentially be going to the employees and, they don't really know that. If they can't, explain that, that's a big issue. So
that's where employers have gotten themselves in trouble is it's hidden back to the employees and expense ratios and the employer didn't do a good job because frankly, that's not what they do for a living.
Yep.
But the truth is there are solutions, whether it's us or someone else, where you can hire out services to do that. And then, obviously, something else maybe talk about employers aren't always getting the maximum benefit for themselves and their employees. And there's ways they can do that. So maybe the structure of the plan sometimes isn't best just to capture the maximum tax or retirement benefits.
Yeah, it's very important. And, one thing that we look at too is, there's not a one size fits all solution. So 401k could be great, but it might not be the best for your company, right? If you're a little small business owner and it's just you and your wife or you and a couple employees, it might make sense to do other qualified plans, whether it's a SEP, whether it's a simple or something along those lines. And one thing that I know that you've been looking at and that you've done a lot for small business owners that make a pretty good income is defined benefit pension plans and kind of how you can structure max funding that and kind of get around some of those, income cap limits and funding limits. So I guess if you can speak on that a little bit too.
Yeah. So there's some cool strategies. If someone is self-employed or maybe them and just their spouse, they can do some really cool plans, the defined benefit plan. And really that's creating your own personal pension plan. And that can allow you to put a ton of money away. None of this $40,000, $50,000 stuff. I'm talking 6-figure numbers. You may be able to put $100,000, maybe $200,000 away in a given year for each person and take maximum deductions there, depending on the structure. So there's some really cool strategies. Again, it is unique. The people that generally fit that category are making high incomes and are self-employed for just them as an employee or maybe them and a spouse. And they see that ongoing for maybe at least the next 3 years or more. That there are some cool strategies that they've never been taught to by anyone, even including their CPA. It does require work, and you do need to have a professional help you, again, whether it's us or someone else. But there are definite strategies out there that are really, really awesome that can help people plan a little better with that.
And who doesn't like tax savings, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like you said before, that's one of the biggest things that you can kind of hopefully get out of the way with doing a plan like that. So
Absolutely.
And then I think another thing that going back to not even just retirees, but even young people especially, that I think is overlooked is estate planning in general. We see a lot of people that don't have proper beneficiary planning. Maybe they kind of forgot about it. Maybe they overlooked it. They don't have a will, power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney. Maybe they need a trust. I guess, can you speak on that and kind of what you've seen in that area as well?
Yeah, it's a great question because I would say estate planning summarizes all this, right? Everyone pretty much needs to do that if you're over the age of 18. And I always say the cheapest estate planning you can do is good beneficiary planning, and it's the most important. A lot of people don't realize that beneficiaries supersede your will, your power of attorney, your everything, right?
So say that again for everybody, just so they
so
understand it.
Your beneficiary supersedes your will. And I used to say, and this is starting to get dated, but people will know old Johnny Cochran from O.J. Simpson's days. If Johnny Cochran wrote your will, supposedly if he was the best attorney in the world, right? It doesn't matter how good he's written your will, whatever your beneficiary says is going to supersede that. And the Supreme Court has upheld that multiple times. So where would that can be an issue is one, maybe you've named an ex-spouse, right? Maybe you got married at 20. You thought you were in love. You were married for 6 months, got divorced, married someone new at 22. You've been married for 50 years. You pass away, and your beneficiary is the original spouse. That's a problem because he or she's going to get the money. And so it's critical. Or maybe you left them as the beneficiary and you just updated your will to the new spouse. Not going to work. The old spouse is going to get the money. So it's critical beneficiaries. We in our office update at least annually. We go through a beneficiary audit to review every account. It's important that's done. But there are a couple other documents that virtually all people need. And that's a will, at least, a power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, and a living will. Sometimes those last two documents can be combined, a healthcare power of attorney and a living will, depending on the attorney. The living will is a statutory document, meaning it's just provided by the state. That living will is, do you want to be on vegetative, if you're in a vegetative state, do you want to be on life-supported device? The healthcare power of attorney is who does elective decisions for you if you're incapacitated. Like, do they do heart surgery on you if you're incapacitated? The durable power of attorney handles money. So you're incapacitated and need to pay your bills. Who's going to handle your money? And then a will just distributes probatable assets. And again, this could be a whole episode in and of itself. But probatable assets, essentially things that don't have a beneficiary on it. So if we got a beneficiary, most nothing goes through a will. But it's still important to do. And then the tag on fifth item that might be needed for some people, if you have means, you have a net worth, there's no perfect number, but in excess of $1 million might be a point you start thinking about it. You have real estate in multiple real estate holdings or real estate in multiple states and or counties. You almost definitely want to consider it. And that would be a living trust or revocable trust. Also, if you have children, you have a complicated situation, you have a disability issue, there's all kinds of stuff. And there's other trust. I'm talking very, very high level. So at least everyone probably needs those four basic documents. And a lot of people need to consider the fifth. And on the living trust, what I always say is if you're working toward that, you got an $800,000 net worth, but you're kind of building up and you got one property you're thinking about buying another, maybe talk with your attorney about going in and getting that living trust established because it is living. It can be used and added to. And again, in the scope of this podcast, some kind of broad New Year's resolutions, I would say, go out and make sure you do these things. It's like going to your dentist. It's maybe not the most fun thing. Schedule a time. If you're to summarize what I'd say, if you're a young entrepreneur, you're growing your business, make sure you're covered both from cash flow, life insurance, and you're investing. If you're thinking about retiring, make sure you cover the things that we talked about, from budgeting, knowing what it is, to knowing your benefits, to Social Security, to taxes and inflation. If you're a small business owner, make sure for sure that you're covering yourself and your liabilities and having a plan that's benefiting you the best you can. But maybe most importantly is what happens if you don't come home or you're disabled tonight. Have the proper documents in place. So I know in this quick podcast, we wanted to real quick throw out what we thought were four big ones, right?
Yeah.
And that's the four that I think that are important, the four high levels.
I agree. And I would say to add to that too, kind of like you mentioned before, whether it's us or somebody else, come see a certified financial planner, because I think one of the great things that we do at our office is, we're not estate planning attorneys and we're not CPAs, but we're knowledgeable in it, right? But we kind of can be the quarterback to wrap all of that in one, right? You're not going to come to us and just get investment advice. We're pitching, we're wanting to do a plan for everybody to really have a understanding of the whole thing we just talked about. Can you retire? Are you maximizing, what you're doing at work? Are you maximizing your investments? Are you maximizing your taxes? Are your estate planning documents in place? And then reviewing that, right? It's not a set it and forget it thing. So I think, kind of wrapping all that up, come see us because we can help with all of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
And refer you to the right people that if you need help in those other categories as well.
Yeah, I think that's the key. Yeah, if we can't do it, someone else can. And often we work with partners because we don't know everything. But I like the quarterback analogy. So the interesting thing in football is a quarterback generally touches the ball every play. And usually we're involved with the client and their other resources such as their CPA and estate planning attorneys and et cetera. So hopefully that was helpful. Always exciting to talk about. And I want to end it with this. We always have our signature question that we ask, and we were talking about maybe doing a little differently. So I'll ask you first. What do you want to do this year that you're not ticked off by the end of next year? Okay. Man. So we're going to call that our New Year's resolution. What do I have to do this year not to be ticked off for next year?
Man, I would say mine really just goes down to helping as many people as I possibly can and build my business, right? I'm, relatively young getting into it. One of my main goals this year was to pass the CFP, which I did. And I think that really gave me the boost for not only the knowledge, but the confidence as well to really go out there and say, hey, I know what I'm talking about. And I really can help. So, whether it's volunteering, I do a lot of volunteer work with, Miracle Hill and some other organizations. So not only just on the business side, but, volunteering in my community as well, right? That's what I'm about. And really helping as many people as I possibly can and build my business this year. I think that's something that if I can look back December 31st of next year and see that I really helped a lot of people and built that out in my community, I'd be super excited about.
Awesome.
What about you? I know you got some New Year's resolutions as well.
Yeah. So, and we're going to do good on a couple of them. So one of them, I'm going to get myself into shape, working on that still.
Same here.
So, we're working on that. And I think I want to purposely find joy in the moment more. Try to do that. I think that's hard on a lot of us. So we get busy with kids and life but be more purposeful in finding the joy in the moment. And then I think on maybe the business end, I am still 25 years later, very passionate about being impactful to a small group of folks that I can meaningfully help. Meaning I can't be everything to everybody, but those that I'm in their lives, I want to be purposeful and meaningful in what we do. And I know from all my skills, education, and experience, I've been able to do that. And I'm more pumped up than ever because I know there's more confusion than ever. And I think there's a lot of things out there that are misleading people or they're not getting led. Either they need to get led or they're being misled. So I want to make sure that I double down, triple down on being as impactful to those folks as I can. And I would encourage, I guess my last thing, all of our listeners to do that. Again, whether it's with us or someone else, hopefully they've learned something from this podcast throughout this last year or two, but certainly from this New Year's resolution one, go out and make some difference in one or more of these areas we talked about, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, make an effort to get out there and kind of tackle the things you need to. Like you said, sometimes it feels like the dentist, but you gotta get your teeth clean, gotta get a financial checkup. So I agree completely.
But if you come to our office, we'll give you candy.
That's very true. Very true.
All right, cool. Thanks, Cameron. And thanks everyone for joining us on this edition by Connected by Community. Go out and find us on all the various social media platforms, podcast. And until we see you next time, go out and make our community great.